Hello and welcome. Welcome. If you're here live, fantastic. I'd love to have you pop into the comments and say hello. If you're watching this on a recording, welcome too. So my name is Julie Fei-Fan Balzer, and you can find me basically everywhere on the internet as Balzer Designs. And today we are going to be talking about modern block printing. This is a beautiful book by Rowan Sevier, and it's absolutely beautiful. Tons of great photography inside. It's just a really, really pretty book. Plus, I love Rowan's work anyway. So before we begin, I just want to go over a couple in-person classes that I have. If you'd like to come here to this studio and play with me for a couple days. So coming up, I have Color Camp, March 10th through 12th. And you can read all about these classes over on my website at juliebalzer.com/in-person-classes.html_, or there's a link in my YouTube video, or just go to my website and click on in-person classes. And in Color Camp, we're really going to be unlocking the magic of color. If you watch my boot camp taster, we're going to be diving deep, deep, deep into value, into understanding color mixing, into really like color palettes, personal colors, all that fun stuff. And breakfast, lunch, drinks, snacks, and all your art supplies are included in the class fee. So I'd love to see you there for that. The Printmakers Party is going to be June 23rd through 25. And I called it a party because it really is going to be an arty party. We're going to be making stamps, stencils, silk screens, which is how you screen print, right? And we're also going to be playing with a gelatin plate. So we're going to be doing a smorgasbord of printing. And again, you'll go home with all these tools you've created to use in your artwork. If you've ever been interested in sort of sampling those things or talking more about how to design good stamps and good stencils, whatever that good kind of means to you, then that's all the kind of stuff we're going to be covering. And again, breakfast, lunch, drinks, snacks, and all art supplies are included in the class fee. And then finally, the last class that I am holding in 2023 in person, and I have to say it's been 3+ years since I've done any in-person teaching, thanks to the pandemic and having a little baby. So is the Mixed Media Collage Intensive. Now, this is for intermediate to advanced students. That means you already know the basics of mixed media collage, and you're really there to find your voice and to really create a body of work. Or if you're going to be working in a series, you can see I have a little syllabus there for what we're going to be going through. And of course, you can find more at the website. Just visit juliebalzer.com and you can click on the in-person classes. So I hope to see you in class. That would be fantastic. As I said, today we are discussing modern block printing. So let me know in the comments if any of you have read it, if you have this book, if you love this book. I'd love to know about it. Now, Rowan is someone who I adore, and I first discovered her on Instagram. She's got a great Instagram account. She always has cute videos. I love reading her captions about her life as an independent artist. I see the dot says that she has the book. And Gabrielle also says that she read it too. And Rhonda's asking, where is the class held? So the in-person classes are here. They're outside of Boston, in my home studio. I have people currently who are coming from other countries like Canada. I have people who are coming from California, all sorts of places. So there are some great hotels and stuff around if you're interested in making a special weekend of it all. Okay, so she is really talented, and I found her on Instagram actually through Carve December, and she taught as part of the 2020 Carve December class. You can see her headshot sort of in the top row, third from the left, and she's a wonderful teacher too, and she's just a generally like nice human being too, which is always nice to be able to say about people, right? Super fun. And let's see. You can see here that I interviewed her on the Adventures in Arting podcast. This is a pull quote from that interview, and I'll be sure to share a link to that interview, but that's a 2020 podcast if you want to go back into the archives and take a peek at that. So basically, we're going to be talking about the book, which, like I said, I really enjoyed. There wasn't a lot in the book that was surprising to me, in the sense that, like, I've been a block printer, you know, and a stamp carver for many, many years. but I really do think it's a beautiful book and really fantastic. Lori says that she bought the book and she's making her way through it. So first of all, I just think the cover even is gorgeous. It's such a beautiful print with just 2 colors. Rowan is so fantastic at creating, a lot of beautiful things. She does a ton of nature art, which I really appreciate. And when you go in, I mean, just look at that. That's such a beautiful print too, isn't it? Everything in this book just made me want to touch it. Again, the photography in here is gorgeous. I love getting a peek into her beautiful studio, and seeing her beautiful artwork in the background and how she stores stuff. It's really, really lovely. So I really like this paragraph. So I thought I would read it to you really quickly. It says, for myself, block printing is an art form that continues to challenge me creatively while supporting my mental health. What do I mean by that? I believe that taking time to make with our hands helps us to slow down, to unplug, to focus on the doing. Carving by hand is a form of meditation for me. My breathing slows, my mind stills, my hands focus on cutting out bits of rubber one piece at a time. Once the block is finished, my attention turns to printing it. The thrill of inking up a block for the first time and seeing how it prints. The joy of the reveal is tangible, and I never tire of it. I felt like she saw into my soul with that paragraph. It's so much how I feel about stamp carving and block printing. It is so meditative, so calming. There are times when when I teach stamp carving, I always have to tell people, stand up, roll your shoulders, because you just get focused and relaxed and you forget that you're hunched over, and Donna says that she bought the book, and that she found it is very well written, and welcome from Belgium. Always nice to see people making it from around the world. Okay, so going into the book a little bit further, she talks about how to use the book, and just PS, how gorgeous is that? Simple, gorgeous. She's using a, rainbow roll on there, which is when you use more than one color, printing at the same time. So beautiful. So here she talks about lots of stuff, but the last sentence I wanted to highlight is she says, please feel free to experiment with whatever you have available and try to find out what works for you. After all, it is through trying and doing that we learn the most. You guys, if I could have an epitaph, it would be, try it, do it, see what works for you. Yes, there are people who you can go to who are experts who can give you advice or guide you or whatever, but the way that you learn the best, especially with something that, is about making, is by trying it with your own hands and seeing what happens and figuring out what actually really works for you. So, like I said, gorgeous photography, beautiful, beautiful things, a lot of illustrations in here as opposed to photography when it comes to tools and stuff. I think I missed a tab here. So she does have these 2-page spread that's on block printing without carving. So one option she gives you is printing with vegetables, and another option is using foam. And I love foam stamps. I make a ton of foam stamps. They're absolutely fantastic. And the only reason that I will carve a stamp is when I want a lot of detail, but especially if I'm using paint or anything, foam stamps are great. And I highly recommend everybody to play with them, right? Sherry says that she loved the book and she is from Washington State. Okay, so next up, she goes through all the basic stamp carving. And one of the things that I think she says is that I think is really important is I've written it right here, positive, negative. So one of the things you have to decide when you're carving a stamp is what is going to stay and what is going to go. And I think this is one of the hardest things for beginning stamp carvers is figuring out what is staying and what is going. And this is the same design, right? Carved 2 different ways, and it's going to look very, very different depending on how you carve it. So that's always something that I think is important to keep in mind. Don't you want to just dive in? Like I said, beautiful photography in this. I just want to dive into all of these beautiful stamps that she carved. So the book takes you through lots and lots of different techniques. I really like this sentence here. She says, part of the charm of block printing is that the results look rustic and handmade. And this is one of the reasons you might stamp an image rather than draw it or produce it digitally. So I want to overemphasize that if I can. So for just a moment, here's the thing to think about. I think people get really crazy about getting their rubber super clean so that it looks like a machine made it. But then I'm kind of like, what's the point? You know, I think that things that are handmade should look handmade. So I absolutely embrace extra rubber, little lines that don't quite work, quirks and all that kind of stuff. I think it's part of what makes a stamp interesting. And then I also agree that I think that one of the things that's so important is when you print, as opposed to like screen printing is a much cleaner process, or digital art is a much cleaner process. But like when you stamp on something, it's going to have some imperfections, and that's a desirable quality. So that's huge. Okay, so let's jump back into the book. So I think I've put tabs at lots of different techniques. Again, like the multicolor blocks, like we were talking about, overprinting or print layering. There's another technique that's so fun, masking, how to do patterns. I mean, she's got so many great techniques in here, talking about the spacing, how to create pattern stamps, tessellations, if you're interested in doing, you know, stamps that seem to sort of endlessly repeat. And then she's got an absolutely stunning set of projects that you can try. I think a lot of them are really simple but fun. And don't you love this stamp? Maybe I love it because it looks like an eye, but it's so beautiful. And she talks you through, you know, how to do these things. And I always enjoy the practical applications. It always gives me new ideas, although I tend to stick to the technique part of a book personally. I tend to be more interested in the techniques and sort of doing somebody else's project. But again, all of these are super fun. And these are stamps made from potatoes. But there's so much fun in here. I really highly recommend this book if you're interested in stamp carving. Again, it's beautiful. I think the contents are great. It goes through lots of different ideas. Oh, and then my last tab is just a thank you to Rowan, who actually mentioned my book as one of the reference resources that she recommends. So that's so nice of her to do, which I really appreciate. Okay, so what I thought we would do today is carve a stamp together. So I've done the sort of boring part of this, and let me zoom in a lot because when you're stamp carving, we really want to be able to see. Okay, so I've done what I consider the boring part, which is I drew a drawing onto a piece of paper with a pencil, and then I'll just flip this rubber over. It has something on the back, obviously, but all you do to transfer the design then is just rub it with your thumb, burnish it, and you can see how the pencil transfers over onto the block. Okay, so then I just outlined it with a marker and colored it in so that I could see what I'm doing. Now, almost all of my carving tools fit into this red Solo cup. Okay. And by the way, Donna says something that I agree is true, which is the projects can be a great springboard for your own work. And I think that's absolutely true. Inspiration is everywhere. So I have markers, I have my knife, I have a couple different carving tools in here. I have 2 speedball handles and then 1 flex cut handle. And I'm just gonna sort of jump in and show you how it's done. So I almost always mark my block like this so I can see what I'm doing. Because if you try to just carve in the pink area, it's really hard to see what's happening. So I hold the tool comfortably in my hand here. And I'm going to work, if I can turn it to the side, it's like slightly angled, but it's not quite straight, and it's definitely not like this. It's like very slightly angled into the rubber. And so I'm going to work out. I'm hoping not to get my head in the camera, so I'm just trying to watch that. So I'm just working out, and you can see how by marking the block, I can now see all of where I have carved, which would be very difficult if I was just carving into pink. The other thing to notice is notice how I turned the block and I did not turn my hand. So it's almost like my right hand stays, my dominant hand, if you're a lefty, it would be your left hand. My right hand stays fairly still, right? And my left hand is actually doing the work of like feeding the block into the blade. Boom. And you can see how little rubber comes out. It's a very, very, very small amount. So you're not digging deeply into your block. It's enough to get the image out, but not so much that you're getting crazy. Okay. So I'm just, and this is sort of the meditative part for me. I love to put on a podcast or a book on tape and just kind of listen as I work. I find it to be a very zen experience. I do try to set a timer to go off like every half hour. Otherwise, I will get up after 2 hours and my back and my neck are totally cranked. One thing that you can do to help yourself with the ergonomics of carving is if you can get your chair a little bit lower than you might normally have it, it helps with the hunching that might otherwise happen if you're quite far above the table. The other thing is you always want to carve away less than you think you should, because it's impossible to add the rubber back in, but you can always carve away more. So I tend to err on the side of cutting away less so that I can go back if I need to carve more. And again, rotating that block and making sure that I'm having a very zen, relaxed experience. So if you have a rubber eraser in your house, you can make a stamp. You don't need to have the speedy carve that I'm using. You can also find a video on my YouTube channel where I first used these flex cut tools that I'm holding, which are like 18 times the price of these speedball tools. And I did not like them. And in fact, they sat in a drawer for, I'm going to say like a couple years before I decided to drag them out and give them another go. So part of it was I had been so familiar with the speedball tools and exactly how they work and how they feel in my hands that it was very different to use the flex cut tool. It interacts with the rubber differently. And I felt clumsy with the flex cut tool where I felt like an expert with the speedball tool. And so I thought, oh, I don't like this at all. But over time, I have come to like it quite a bit. And in her book, Rowan recommends both this, which is a flex cut tool, and the File, which starts with a P brand of tools. And I have to say that most stamp carvers that I know, those are the brands that they talk about. Okay, so I finished the inner layer of my flower just with us talking. And I see that another Julie is chiming in, waving from Cape Cod and saying, loving all the printing you've been sharing. Thank you so much. And again, now when I go in here to this next layer, I'm looking at sort of where I've marked and I'm paying attention to those lines and carving away less than I think I want to, so that I can always come back and carve more. So I used to be very aggressive about carving away a lot and feeling like it was faster if I just made one pass. But the problem is I ended up a lot of times with things I didn't like, or it was just the image wasn't right. And when you leave a little more rubber, you get a little more of a chance to fix it. And similarly, I didn't used to mark my block so aggressively. I used to maybe like draw a little bit of a ballpoint pen outline or something and sort of wing it. And what I found is I was less satisfied with the results because the process of marking the block forces you to think about that thing I was talking about earlier about the positive and the negative, so that you really have to mark the block as you're going to carve it. And it's almost like you get to preview the image to see what it's going to be. Now you'll notice that with all these little kind of like spiky bits in the flower, I'm carving out as opposed to in. And that's because I don't want to go into that point, because I want to be able to stop. Because if my hand slips, I'm going to end up cutting into something I don't want to cut into. So that's why, again, for all these little spiky bits here, I'm going out. The other thing is you'll notice I keep my fingers out of a direct line for the most part, as much as I can, from the blade. I have cut myself with one of these tools. It is very painful. It is tetanus shot city, and I would not recommend it to anybody. So one of the reasons, like Rowan mentions in her book, she doesn't like lino. partially because you are more likely to cut yourself with lino because it is tougher to cut through, and that's a hazard to think about. And I feel the same way. This is Speedy Carve from Speedball. She uses a brand that I'm not familiar with, but she recommends it in the book. But it's, again, the same thing as like it's PVC rubber, which prints well, takes ink really well, is nice and soft. I think you want to find something that's not so soft that it crumbles. That's one of my major complaints about some of the other rubbers out there, is that they break and they crumble. And these, I've had stamps that I've carved for years and not always treated nicely, PS. And they've really lasted. So that's a huge consideration for me. So again, I'm trying to make sure that I move the block and not the tool. I am working on top of a self-healing mat. I used to exclusively work on top of glass because glass is a much nicer sort of slick surface, but I lost my glass mat at some point. And so then I started using a self-healing mat, and I found like it's not exactly the same, but it's close enough. I would say I have a slight preference for working on a pane of glass just because, again, it's slightly more slippery. There is more gription, if I can make up a word here, on a self-healing mat, but I don't think it's so noticeable that it, does anything. Sherry has a great tip, which is, she says, I'm a junk shopper and I love to find old lino cuts that people have passed on, and it's such a wonderful find, and that sounds super fun to find. Kim asks, what's the difference between this and lino cut, if any? So I went over it a little bit just now, but I'll say it again, which is Speedy Carve is a very soft material. It's made from rubber. There are some differences in terms of how you can print them. Obviously, Speedy Carve is squishy, so it doesn't really work in a press. So anybody who's printing in a press is going to want to use lino. And I'm talking about a roller press, like an etching press, is going to want to use lino or something hard, because this will just get squished and your image will get totally distorted, which you don't want. This also takes stamping ink really well. Lino doesn't necessarily always take stamping ink. This is also way more expensive. Lino is much cheaper. This is softer and easier in your hands. You have to warm lino in order to cut it, and your tools have to be way sharper. You have to be a little more thoughtful, I think, about carving. I would call Speedy Carve the lazy person's carving material. If you are lazy and just want to take it out of the package and use it, then Speedy Carve's for you. If you want to think about it, prep it, make sure your tools are in a good place, work a little bit harder, your hands, especially if you have arthritis or something, I think lino is a lot harder to deal with. And Sherry says lino makes great shelf decorations. Yeah, you can, I think that stamps, blocks that are carved are beautiful as art objects. Absolutely. And kind of, when you find the old ones, they may be slightly brittle is the other thing. So they may not work really great for printing because they may be brittle after time. And so you can always use them as a decoration then. That's a great tip, Sherry. Thank you. So we're almost done with this stamp. Can you believe it? It doesn't even take that long. An artist I met in Japan used erasers from Daiso to carve. She made great prints with them. Absolutely. Erasers are often made from the same material or a similar plastic material. So plastic erasers are wonderful. And they can be much cheaper than buying the actual stuff. So that's always fun. You just need to make sure. I find the sort of white colored erasers are the ones for me that seem to be a similar material. Sometimes the pink erasers are kind of crumbly. You want it to have that plasticky feel is the best way I can think to describe it. But yeah, that's a great way, especially if you're carving small pieces, to be economical about getting your material. Do you ever mount the Speedy Carve to a wood block or feel the need to? I don't. I do, however, sometimes temporarily mount them on an acrylic block. If they're really small and I feel like it's getting fussy with printing them, I will sometimes mount them to an acrylic block. And I do have a tutorial on how to do that in the Carve December class over in the online classroom at, let's see, I think I have a banner to even show you. There you go, at balderdesigns.com/classroom with a capital C. And that can be useful. I know people who mount them to wood, but I have carved literally hundreds of stamps. And if they were mounted on wood, I would have to go live somewhere else because there'd be no room for me in this studio. So it's much easier to store the unmounted ones. And then I can temporarily, like I said, mount them if I need to get my fingers out of the way, because I got some surprisingly big fingers sometimes when I'm trying to do something. Okay, so how do you come up with your designs? So this design was based on, I said, you know what, I want a flower that doesn't touch the edges and has some, you know, interesting little details. And then I drew this picture. And that's where it came from. I do have a class called the Carve December Workbook, which is actually all about designing stamps and showing you how to like pick a theme and an idea and come up with them. But I think a lot of times it's just about thinking about what is actually going to be useful to you. Like, I'm going to use this stamp as opposed to something that's just pretty. I can already tell you just from inking it up that I don't like the way the center looks, and I'm going to need to cut that out. I'm just going to press a piece of paper onto here and burnish it with my fingers really quickly. This is just a test print so that I can take a look at what I've got. So there is my stamp. It's attractive, but I feel like the center is really, really lost in here. Okay. How do you store your Speedy Cart stamps? Can they be stacked on each other? They can. I store them in, hold on, let me grab it. I store them in plastic photo boxes, and they're labeled. You can see this says nature too, and they just sort of rattle. They just sort of rattle around in here. Sometimes they're very stuffed, but these are just, this is a 5x7 plastic photo box from Michaels. So super duper easy. Okay, so let's fix the center. Let me think about what I want. So sometimes when I'm thinking about what I want, I can take, like, this is a China marker, and I can draw on the print and say, like, oh, do I want to do like a star in the center? You know, do I want to do something else? I actually really like that star. So let's go with that. So I'm just gonna come on through here, give myself a little star. But the good news is if I didn't like it, I wouldn't have actually messed up my block. I would have just had it on there. So let's give this another test print, see how we like it. And I find items from nature are really good things to start with when you're carving, because they, oh, my table is shaking like crazy, because they're imperfect, right? Things from nature are imperfect, and we accept that. So let's see how this is looking. So there is my print. It's beautiful. I really like it. So let's go ahead and maybe print a tag with it. And by the way, this is the entirety of the rubber. This is everything I carved out of to make this stamp. That's it. It's a very, I mean, look at my finger compared to this pile of rubber, right? It's a very small amount. So let me just go ahead and dump off all that excess rubber. And let's get some, like a tag, I think. Okay, so I'm just going to use a manila tag right here. And let's get some zooming out here because I think we're too close in right now. Let's add that into the stream. There you go. So now you can really see it. Here are my test prints. This is the one I drew on. This is the one that's carved out. This is the ink that I was using. This is archival ink from Ranger. This ink pad is probably like 10 to 15 years old, but I keep re-inking it, and so it keeps working. If you see archival ink now, it has different packaging. Okay. Did you ever get an idea to carve a stamp and find one in your drawer just like it? I haven't. I actually, stamps take a long enough time to carve that I pretty much remember most of the stamps that I've carved on some level. Like I'll be like, oh, I usually what happens is I'm like, didn't I carve a stamp like that? And I can't find it. That's what happens more often to me. Okay, so let's go ahead and stamp this. I'm going to use some Fei-Fan Clear ink pads. These are just really nice ink pads. And I'm thinking that we could do this this feels like a pink stamp maybe? Or no, maybe it feels like a blue stamp. Maybe I feel like a blue stamp. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use this Fei-Fan Clear. I'm going to do the first print onto paper because I'm not sure if there's still any black ink in here, which might be mixing with the blue. So let me just stamp onto the paper to see what's there. Nope, looks nice and clean. There's a stray piece of rubber here on the table. Okay, so again, I'm inking this up. You'll notice that I am pressing the ink pad to the stamp and not the other way around, which makes sure that it is fully inked. I can see the sheen of the ink on there. And then I'm going to print this. Let's do it in a diamond pattern, shall we? So slightly at an angle here. So there is my, oops, I got a bad print, right? Where I didn't actually push all the way down, but it's fine. So now another consideration when you're printing a repeat like this is, should you leave space or not? So I'm going to leave space between the prints to create a secondary motif of a lattice that's kind of running through here. And again, imperfections are to be embraced. That's the nature of printmaking, and it's the nature of doing things by hand. So I don't think they're to be avoided. I think they're to be, enjoyed. So I use different inks for different occasions, right? The archival ink is something, it's a beautiful ink that goes on top of paint and all sorts of stuff. So if I'm working in my art journal or on top of another surface, it's one of my absolute favorite go-to inks. Where the Fei-Fan Clear will not, for me, dry on top of paint. So it really needs a porous surface, but it's much juicier looking than the archival ink when you just print onto paper. So it's great for doing things like tags or making collage paper on some kind of porous paper, like copy paper or something like that. But here we go. Let's keep printing this guy. And again, I'm glad I left the space. I think the kind of lattice pattern that's coming up is really cool and adds to the effect as opposed to if I had printed them right on top of each other. So let's see if we can get a good print over the tag thingamabob, whatever that thing is at the top of the tag. I gotta really push. Get it in there pretty good. And then I just want to get this tiny little bit right there to finish that off. And here is my beautiful finished tag, a gorgeous pattern. I can see this for wrapping paper and all sorts of stuff. And I think all of the little, imperfections where the printing didn't quite work out are absolutely beautiful, and how long did that take us? I mean, 15 minutes, maybe 20, maybe less than that. I mean, this is why when people ask me about Carve December, where we carve a stamp every day in December, how it's doable, the answer is you can do amazing things in a very, very short period of time. So I guess I will just thank you so much, everybody, by the way, who says that it's beautiful, gorgeous stamp. I appreciate it. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying, if you've ever been interested in carving stamps, I think this is a great book to get you started and kicked off. There's lots of different techniques in here. You should follow Rowan on Instagram, even if you don't like block printing, just because she's really talented and I think really inspiring too. So definitely look for her. She's Little Rowan Redhead And again, like I think block printing is super fun. You end up with custom stuff. It really, truly takes much less time than anybody thinks and is so much easier than you think. So have some fun with it. I want to talk for just a minute before we end about the next book club. So we're doing something kind of a little bit weird. So the next book club is going to be on March 8th at 12:15 Eastern. So that's a month from now. Today's February 8th, right? And the book is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Okay. Very, very famous book. Now, this book takes 12 weeks to work through. It's written in, if you can see this here, like it says there you go, week 2. Okay. So what we're going to do is starting March 8th, I am going to go live every Wednesday for 12 weeks. And I will go live on YouTube and in the Balzer Design Students group, which is on Facebook. So I'll go live there and I will go live on YouTube and discuss each week. So if you want to play along, you have a month to get the book. If you don't have it, you can find used copies all over the place. It's been around for like 20 or 30 years. And you can go to your library and get it. You can go all sorts of places and get a copy. And we will work through this book together for 12 weeks, every single week on Wednesday. So I hope you'll join me for that. I think it's going to be fun. And when I was a kid and I was interested kind of in art, someone gave me this. I didn't get it. I maybe read part of it. I think I tried a couple morning pages. I actually couldn't find my copy of it anywhere. So I had to buy a new copy. So I'm really excited to kind of jump in. So many people talk about it and I can't decide if I'm going to love it or hate it. So I hope you'll join me for that. I think it's going to be fun and exciting. And I will see you guys then. So come join me for an in-person class. I'd love to see you, or I'd love to see you online. If you want to learn stamp carving, I've got lots of online classes for that too. Thanks so much for coming out. I'll see you next time.